Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Darklands. Sit back, relax, enjoy a cup of tea, and listen as I, your host, Dr. Smacktalk, tell you a tale of animal mutilations, alien encounters, strange unknown voices, and Bigfoot. Although reports of alien beings associated with animal mutilations are relatively rare, there have now been a sufficient number to justify the hypothesis of alien, or at least non-human involvement. The following case provides us with an excellent example. Highlights some of the complex aspects of the multifaceted nature of UFO encounters and provides us with important clues as to the nature of the phenomenon and its interaction with human beings and animals. The case was investigated for APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, by Dr. Leo Sprinkle, a University of Wyoming psychologist, Dr. John Deere, a seismologist, his wife Janet, and Dr. Peter Van Arsdale, an anthropologist. As a prerequisite to relating their experiences, the witnesses insisted on anonymity and requested that the precise location of their ranch in Colorado should not be divulged. The principal witnesses were Jim, a former U.S. Air Force security officer and public relations officer with professional training in physical and biological sciences, John, who at the time held a management position in a large corporation, his wife Barbara, and their teenage sons, and a law officer. Prior to the experience, John and Barbara had pooled their financial resources together with Jim in order to purchase the ranch, which is located in the Rocky Mountains area. The property included grazing area, woods and springs, feeding a pond near their ranch house. After settling in, unusual events began to occur, including untraceable humming sounds, electrical power failures, sounds of someone or something walking around outside the house, sightings of UFOs and humanoids, Bigfoot-type creatures observed in the woods, messages broadcast on the radio and stereo systems, and cattle mutilations. On approximately the 16th of October 1975, during the night, Jim noticed that the cattle were braying loudly and went outside to see what was disturbing them. Jim recounts, "We have a large coonhound that was watching their property, and the dog was extremely afraid of something. He was on the porch and wanted in. I grabbed a gun and went out. Range cattle do not usually come close to you, but they were packing me so tightly that I could hardly get through the middle of the herd. I walked about halfway to the dam, and above the dam was a large lighted object. It was orange and trapezoidal shaped. I was going to see what it was, and I got about halfway there when I realized whatever it was, I didn't need to know. That was during the cattle mutilation days, and I had a small caliber rifle, and I decided to leave well alone." Jim later learned that a large reward for the arrest of the cattle mutilators had been offered, and one night decided to go hunting for them with a 12-gauge shotgun. But he found himself unable to move from the couch he had been sitting on. "It was like paralysis," he said. "It was like I was drugged." Barbara suddenly experienced an increase in her heart rate, accompanied by a sense of panic and a change in her thinking pattern and a flood of memories. Barbara explained, "I remembered things that I had completely forgotten, and it frightened me. And by that time I was screaming, and Jim came to from whatever his problem was. He couldn't seem to talk. Shortly after that, John showed up. I started to tell him what had happened, but I couldn't talk about it. Every time I started to, I would stutter. Then Jim started telling him what had happened, and then I was able to talk about it. That was the first strange thing. It had never happened to me before in my life." Sometime later, Joe, the eldest son, together with some friends, discovered a mutilated cow about 200 yards from the house. Jim recounted that the boys came back in a panic. It was snowing heavily, and we decided the first thing to do was to get into town and get the law officer. The boys were pretty upset, because they felt that something was following them. I assumed it was a natural paranoia. We went out and I followed the route. We found huge footprints that had followed them all the way from the cow to the horse barn. The footprints were even in the soft manure inside the horse barn. They were, I guess, 18 inches. I didn't measure them, but they were quite large, and I guess what you would call a Bigfoot footprint. The cow exhibited classic signs of mutilation. The udders was removed surgically. The sac under the udders wasn't perforated, explained Jim. One eye was missing. One ear was missing, and that was it. There was no blood. All the blood had been removed, and there were no tracks in the snow around the cow. The rectum was also removed. Jim reported the incident to the law officer, who promised to investigate a few days later, but he never showed up. 2 weeks later, a second mutilation was discovered. Although the animal, a bull, did not belong to the ranch, Its head was twisted back and various organs and parts of the body had been removed, as if by a surgical operation. Jim drove into town and called on the law officer, who suggested meeting in a restaurant. I asked him why I hadn't heard from him and why he wasn't trying to solve this, Jim said. He explained to me that they knew what the mutilations were, and they had known for some time. They only report 1 in 4, and in this county alone there had been over 400 reports by that time. It was being done by extraterrestrials, he said, and they had spoken to the FBI about it. I told him that I couldn't believe that, and if he couldn't solve the crime, at least don't blame it on something like that. I made an enemy of the man, and frankly I didn't care because we had lost 2 cattle. One night at about 10 o'clock, 2 visiting friends and a rancher heard a strange noise emanating from the cistern southeast of the house, about 60 yards up a slope. All of a sudden, after listening to the noise, Jim told the investigators a huge dark object pushed its way through the barbed wire and came straight at them down the hill. They all came running into the house. We subsequently went back and traced the route, and sure enough, there were some footprints. I removed some hair from the fence, noticing that it had pushed its way through barbed wire, and it didn't jump the fence, but just by force alone spread it and went through. There were long strands of hair. Jim collected the hair and took photographs of the footprints. Samples of the hair were sent to a biogeneticist in Denver, who reported that it matched no known species. By then, I was getting more and more upset about the activities, Jim related. One law officer was encouraging me to keep my mouth shut about it because he didn't want a full-scale panic in the county. I told him I wasn't interested in panics, I was interested in finding out who was mutilating my cattle. By this time, the tensions mounted. Everyone in the house had become fearful and depressed. Jim began to sleep near the front door with a gun beside him, staying awake for most of the night, hoping to catch the culprit. I was beginning to suspect that somehow the real estate man was involved, and that he was trying to make us break the contract so that he could resell the house. Alerted to a humming sound at about 2 a.m. one night, Jim looked out of the window and saw disc-shaped objects flying slowly past the front of the house and up a gully. On other occasions, Jim saw the hairy creature running near the house. I was tolerating it to a certain degree. One night I didn't, and I went out, and one was running beside the corral, and I shot it. Barbara came running out, and when Harry and Roger came back from town, they went tracking to see if they could find what I had shot. It didn't seem hurt at all. There was a little flinch. I'm a good shot, so I know I hit it. There was no blood, no traces, no signs. We pursued it onto the property next to us. Then I heard the most unusual sound, like a double sound. It was a whine with almost a beeping noise intermixed. Nothing was found, however. We returned to the house and notified the law officer that we had shot one. He gave me hell and told me I was lucky this time, and that he didn't want anybody killed. One night, following further disturbances, Jim lost his temper and stormed outside the house. I don't remember exactly what I said, but most of it can't be repeated. I think I threatened that if we can't have the land, then you won't either. I'll blow the whole thing away. I meant it too. I would have destroyed it before I would have moved right then. Jim returned to the house and calmed down. Then later went outside again. Well, outside, he said this voice just came out of nowhere and said 4 words. Dr. Jim, we accept. I think that was the first time I was really shaken, rather than it just angering me or disorientating me. That was all. It was just like FM stereo. It came from everywhere. There were many smaller incidents that were unnerving. We had several friends come out who were harassed one way or the other and terrified. I went in and talked to the law officer again. If he really felt we were in any danger, I would move the boys. He said that no one he knew of had been hurt. They had lost horses, a lot of cattle, and animals of one kind or another, and that people had been terrified. The mutilations were going on at a much heavier rate during this period. This was 1976, and they were occurring weekly. Also during that period, 2 airline pilots had came out to the ranch asking if they could put an airstrip on the land in exchange for Jim's use of their plane. Jim consented to the plan. About 3 weeks later, one of the pilots and 2 others were killed in a crash nearby. Others who had inquired deeply into the mutilations, Jim learned, had disappeared mysteriously, including the editor of a magazine. Jim also learned that 2 Air National Guard interceptors set up to pursue UFOs in the vicinity had crashed. The next night, 2 squadrons of interceptors circled the area. I was with Air Defense Command, Jim said, and I know that when they bring them out, they are nuclear armed, and they don't fly them around for games. He counted 26 aircraft, which appeared to be surveying everything, presumably in an effort to locate parts of the crashed planes. All this was a little unnerving, so I decided I was going to stop my inquiry, Jim told the investigators. I was just going to quietly mind my own business. One night at about 2 a.m., 9 discs had landed in the front yard, observed by Jim, Barbara and Harry. A friend, David, and another friend were asleep upstairs, but did not respond when called. Jim bravely walked out of the front of the house and approached the objects. Curiously, he thought he and Barbara clearly saw the disc-shaped devices. Harry saw a large, dark football shapes, as if they were blocking part of the view. As Barbara watched this incredible scene, her face pressed close to the window, she was suddenly struck forcibly in the forehead by something, knocking her senseless to the floor for a short time. While the others attended to her, the objects disappeared. I thought about it subsequently, and wondered why they didn't do it to me, since I was the one walking towards them. But then I began to understand that they did the most practical thing they could do to get me back inside and get both people away from the window, and I think I really began to suspect how clever they were. Then I began to suspect that it might be the government that was doing this to us, except there were a lot of unusual things. For instance, David had been paralyzed during the incident. He could hear us calling, but he couldn't get up until it was over. But then he went out walking with me, and what we call ultrasonics, the extremely high-pitched sounds, were going on out there, and continued throughout the night. David was sick for 3 days. The sound would sometimes give us headaches, but not all of us at once, to different individuals at different times. At about 2 a.m. one night, in the presence of guests, the lights went out in the house, and a mechanical-sounding voice was heard coming from all the radio and TV speakers. We were sitting right in front of a console stereo, said Jim, and the voice came out of it. I can almost recite the words exactly. They were burned in my memory. Attention! We have allowed you to remain. We have interfered with your lives very little. Do not cause us to take action which you will regret. Your friends will be instructed to remain silent concerning us. One of the guests, Dan, a computer and electronics specialist, was determined to find a rational explanation for the mysterious broadcast, and dismantled the stereo set. He went through the whole unit and said he couldn't figure it out. He checked it, and the stereo was off. The phonograph was on when the lights went off, but the radio receiver part was off. It was on the phono. We found that the type of transmitter it would take, even from close range, to cause a signal of that intensity to go through the house would be beyond our means to ever put up. In another conversation with the law officer, Jim learned about a bizarre incident involving a strange box. He said he was out on patrol one night, and he saw in a group of trees this box that was blinking. He didn't want to go in alone, so he raced back to town and picked up another law officer. When they got back, the trees were gone, the box was gone, everything was gone. He thought they had gone into the ground. He had seen things go into the ground before, but I've never seen that happen. But Jim did see one of the boxes. Together with the older son, Joe, Jim, on a compulsion, drove up one night in January 1977 to the top of a hill, where a 35-foot circle had been for some time, and nothing had grown. In the trees, a yellow light could be seen, apparently shining on the car. So we got out and we walked over. There was a box on the ground, Jim said. I told Joe to stay back about 10 feet. It was making a buzzing sound, and there was a light, like inside but not on it. Hard to describe. It was night, but there was a full moon, and as I walked about 4 feet from it, it changed its tone entirely. It sounded like a bunch of angry bees. The sound went up, so I backed away and told Joe to go back to the car and watch me as I walked up to the box. We then walked back to the car, and I told Joe that whatever happens, do not leave the car. I then walked back, and the box was gone. Later that night, Jim noticed another light in the trees. I told Joe to go on into the house, and I walked down to the trees. And I think that's the closest I've ever come to being afraid. I had to force my legs to take me down because I didn't know what I would see. I walked down to the light, and there were 2 individuals waiting for me in the light. The light didn't come from anywhere. I can't describe it. It was just light. They obviously weren't nervous, and as soon as I walked up, they spoke to me by name and told me. I can quote that exactly. How nice of you to come. It was just as though I had been expected. Down below, possibly 50 to 60 feet from us, was the disc on the ground. It was lightly lit, just enough to see. And I had no doubts that these were two men. They were approximately 5 foot 6 inches tall. I would say they had on tight-fitting clothing, like a flight suit. I noticed the clothing changing colours from brown to silver, but I didn't know how. They were very fair and had large eyes. They seemed perfectly normal, completely relaxed. They had blonde hair with something over their head, but I could still see the hair, and the hair was obviously blonde. It wasn't long. It didn't make much of an impression. The thing that impressed me most was their eyes. Their facial features were finer. They were most delicately effeminate and completely self-assured. I was up there maybe 5 minutes. They apologized for the inconveniences they had caused us, and told us that more equitable arrangements would be worked out between us, whatever that means. I wanted to ask a lot of questions, but found that I didn't. Like, where are you from? Didn't ask any of that. There are several things they asked me not to repeat that have no significant meaning at all. I think maybe they were just checking to see if I would keep my mouth shut. I told them that if they were mutilating cattle it was very foolish to do so and to draw that much attention to themselves. They didn't give me any earth-shattering information, or even admit they were mutilating the cattle. The only thing I found out for sure is that this Biz Fuzzy thing, Bigfoot, obeys their commands. They mentioned the box, and that I did the right thing, backing away from it. It was what I called an implied threat. They nodded, and approximately 20 to 30 feet away, Bigfoot, as I call him, got up and walked towards the box. The box changed tone, and he dropped. They said, as you can see, they are quite lethal. They said that they would come back and talk again. There were no goodbyes. I just somehow felt that it was time to go. They did tell me that my memory wouldn't be tampered with. I thought about all of the things I would have liked to have asked. I hadn't decided they came from space, and I'm still not sure of that. They looked enough like people. That was my first thought, that somehow the government was trying to do this. They were completely self-assured, and they spoke vernacular English. I was pretty rocked because I did see the disc, and it was quite clear. I walked on back to the house. I was excited over the more equitable arrangement. I guess I had some illusion that they were going to give me the cure for cancer, or $1 billion or something. I couldn't even figure out why they had even bothered to talk to me. It was obvious that I was supposed to come. They didn't say anything that would indicate why, except a more equitable arrangement. Jim felt sure that some kind of permanent alien installation was located on the ranch. Our ranch overlooks a military installation. We have a perfect view, he explained to the investigators. I can only assume they are watching us, watching our military potential. I'm reasonably sure that they play rough. It's not big brothers from space who are interested in us as spiritual beings or whatever. I am absolutely convinced that they couldn't care less if we live or die. We're nuisances, although I think they may be more humanitarian than we are. I have no doubts that they are mutilating the cattle. None at all. The cattle are being lifted into the air, they are being drained of blood, and they are being mutilated, and they are then being lowered. If they wanted to do just biological research on cattle, they could have disposed of their remains without them being found. It's obviously some intent to instill fear, and that has been quite successful. I figured out early in the game that the government is sending in helicopters in large numbers from several sources, but they are doing it to cover up what is really happening. I'm absolutely sure that the helicopters have nothing to do with the mutilations, and the helicopters are not of sufficient size to lift a 2,600-pound bull. You also could hardly carry a bull away in a helicopter in a manner so that it wouldn't be seen. During discussions about the mutilations with an officer at the nearby Air Force base, Jim learned that the base had had its share of troublesome UFO incidents, and that the directive exists on how to deal with them. The officer also asked Jim if he experienced any trouble with Bigfoot. In fact, about 20 people had witnessed them on various occasions at the ranch. Apparently the Air Force had directives on these elusive creatures too. It is possible it could have been a totally subjective experience, Jim rationalized in the summing up of these and other extraordinary experiences at the ranch. Even with all of us, it could have been hallucinations. It could just have been a lot of things. Maybe none of it happened. Maybe everybody there was deceived in some way. I can't picture how, but just because I can't picture it doesn't mean it couldn't happen. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of this week's tale. Thank you for joining me as we journeyed through the Darklands. We hope to be back next week with another tale, and that you will join us and sit back, relax, and have a cup of tea as we wander through the Darklands. Goodbye and good night.